Good morning and welcome to Crack the Mic podcast with Agent of Change, Corey Davis. And this week's segment is entitled Human Trafficking. The decadence of a nation often precedes its fall, especially when the nation or its leaders decides to turn a blind eye to an issue that is so widespread, yet is ignored due to the excessive indulgence in the pleasure and or luxury that's afforded to those who benefit from those atrocious activities. Now, in the case of human trafficking, now, in its purest form, it is an abomination to a nation in the eyes of God, because if you were to look at any religious text, it'll suggest that God or the Most High destroyed or held accountable those who perpetuated those very awful acts. For example, in the Holy Bible, the Egyptians, when they decided to maintain their control over the Israelites, when God declared through his servant Moses to tell Pharaoh to let my people go, and consequently, when Pharaoh decided not to do so, God issued judgment. That judgment ultimately led to the destruction of the Egyptian nation. And to help me further this discussion, I have a special guest, the Honorable State Attorney for Miami-Dade County, Catherine Fernandez Rundle. Good morning.
Hi, Corey. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm so delighted to be with you. And boy, I just hope I can somewhat compare myself to that incredible enthusiasm and energy that you have. And that was a beautiful introduction. Having been to Israel many times myself, I never really put those together. But when you talk about slavery, and then we're going to talk about modern day slavery, I mean, that truly was a perfect segue to the very tragic conversation we're going to have this morning.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful to have you here. Now, in this podcast, we will just lay down the foundation for an understanding of what human trafficking is, what it looks like, and what you can do to combat the issue. So, without further ado, State Attorney, Ms. Kathy, let's just delve into the conversation, if we may. Now, we hear a lot about human trafficking all the time. So what exactly is it, and why is it so pervasive in the state, in South Florida, rather?
Well, first of all, I'm really delighted to hear that people are hearing about it, because 10, 11 years ago, Corey, it was really, we didn't know what it was.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't until 2012 that there's this national database called Polaris, and they keep data on this for Congress. So the Congress knows how to allocate monies, law enforcement monies, service provider monies to different parts of the country. Right. And what I discovered was that Florida ranked number 3
Wow.
in the United States for the number of victims of human trafficking. And Miami, we love being number 1 in some things, but that was not good news.
Wow.
We were number 1 in Florida for the numbers of victims of human trafficking. And so, Corey, that's when I began my journey to try to find out, who are these victims, where are these victims, and what are we doing for these victims? And I discovered at that time, we only had like 3 cases. So on this journey to try to find out, so who are they? I've learned that there are kids. They are not necessarily transported children or young adults from other parts of the world coming into our state, into our community. There are kids. They're in our schools. They're in our parks.
Wow.
They're in our homes. They're in our churches. And they're in our foster care system. Is a very large universe, unfortunately, for very vulnerable victims. Victims of human trafficking are vulnerable young people or children. They tend to be, what happens is, oftentimes, and it's not all the same, and what basically it's whether you you labor somebody as a slave
Wow.
domestically.
Mm-hmm.
You work in your house. Agriculture. We've
Mm-hmm.
had cases where they will make the boys especially work in the fields, the
Mm-hmm.
girls work in the fields, and then girls work at night in the trailers for the boys that were working in the field. So
Wow.
you have all forms. You have most of it though is about money.
Mm.
It's sexual exploitation. It's a solicitation and the sale of our children.
Wow.
And I must tell you, Decor, if your folks are listening to this, what is it about? It's all about money. It's a business,
Absolutely.
and it's on
Absolutely.
the and it really is a modern day slavery. And so let me tell you, worldwide, it's a $152 billion industry. In the
Wow.
United States, it's a $32 billion industry.
Mm.
And so who are they? Who are these victims? As I
Mm-hmm.
said, I told you where they are. Well, let me tell you, they're as young as 11 and 13, 11, 12, 13 years old. We have those
Wow.
victims. 65% of them, I'm sorry, 91% are
Mm-hmm.
females, 9% are males.
Mm-hmm.
About just under 40% are minors. What does that mean? Under
Mm-hmm.
the age of 18. The
Mm-hmm.
remainder are between the ages of 18 and 24. So
Wow.
if you think about it, Corey, what you're really talking about is little people, our children and our youth.
Mm.
So right, so they're aged between 13 and 24. And I will tell you the breakdown demographically, racially,
Mm-hmm.
is Latinos is about 24% white, Caucasian 35%, Black African American about 39%.
Wow.
And so if you can just imagine, we're talking about little people.
Mm.
Um, and then the other thing that we've learned is that if what happens is oftentimes these young people
Mm-hmm.
are experiencing a problem in their home, right?
Wow.
So they don't know what to do. Sometimes it's an older male. And
Mm.
believe me, we have a lot of cases involving, believe it or not, fathers, grandparents,
Mm.
grandfathers,
Wow.
uncles, older cousin, somebody that moves in the house,
Mm-hmm.
mom's new boyfriend, mom's new husband. And as their little one reaches puberty, inappropriate things begin to happen. And
Wow.
sometimes they don't know what to do, they don't know where to go. Sometimes they try to tell mom, mom doesn't believe it. Sometimes they're too ashamed to tell anybody, so they run. And what
Mm.
they do is they go what we call couch to couch. I don't know if you ever heard that phrase,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
yeah,
Yes.
they go
Yes.
couch to
Mm.
couch, friends' homes, and then eventually they hit the streets. And our data is exactly like the national data.
Mm.
If you are a runaway within 48 hours,
Mm.
the bad guys out there, they know exactly what they're looking for. That's what makes them so vulnerable. They can tell isolation. They can tell there's a self-esteem issue. They're not with any adults. They're alone. They feel isolated and they are isolated.
Wow.
And so that's when the predators pounce on them and do a number of different things. I can tell you about it, so many cases. I
Mm.
will tell you, DeCoy,
Mm-hmm.
that I'm very proud of what we did, right?
Absolutely.
Because I was very disappointed in us as a community, as a law enforcement community,
Mm-hmm.
as a prosecutor, that I didn't know that this was all happening in our alleys and backyards and churches and foster care system.
Mm.
So we really revved up everything. As I told you from the beginning, we had
Mm-hmm.
like 3 cases since we started this
Mm-hmm.
building this over the last 10 years, 10, 11 years. We now have touched over 1,200
Wow.
victims of human trafficking, and
Mm.
we have filed just under 900 criminal, human trafficking related cases. That's a huge advancement.
Mm-hmm.
And Corey, that's only what we've touched in the criminal arena.
Wow.
That does not include, we have a lot of wonderful non-for-profits in our community.
Mm-hmm.
We have a lot of private shelters, faith-based,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
a lot of faith-based glory. There's a whole bunch of different faith-based shelters
Mm-hmm.
that they will take in victims, and we don't even necessarily see them because a lot of victims don't want to prosecute.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm.
They'll say, I know he's a bad guy, but he's my bad guy, and he's the only guy he's got. And
Wow.
which is really sad when you think
Wow.
about it,
It
because
is.
they provide the shelter, the food, the clothing. The other thing is, let's not lose sight of the fact they drug these children.
Wow.
And they drug them, they get them hooked. A lot of times they do it to make them more amenable
Mm-hmm.
to be beaten and being forced to have sex. By the way, the
Mm-hmm.
data says that these children are forced to have sex up to 20 times a day, 5 to 7 days a week.
Wow. Wow.
So they begin with drugs, they beat them, they kick them in the head, they beat them in the ribs. If you're really bad, sometimes they'll send 2 or 3 men into a room to really punish you. They threaten your family. We've had a lot of cases where a young girl, let's say she's 15 and she has a sister that's 12,
Mm-hmm.
they'll threaten, we're gonna do to your 12-year-old what we did to you if you don't work
Wow.
with us. Yeah, it's really what I call the core, the underbelly of humanity.
Wow.
It really is.
Wow. Well, we're going to go ahead and pause for a commercial, but this conversation is absolutely riveting. It is shocking. But let's go ahead and take a commercial break. We'll be right back with the state attorney for Miami-Dade County, Catherine Fernandez Rundle.
Me and old Hal have been together for a long time. Recently, I realized that I could use some help with basic everyday tasks, but Hal depends on me, and I'm not going to leave him. I don't have to. Yes, that was good news, wasn't it, Hal?
Immaculate Home Health Care can give you the help you need so you can stay safely and comfortably at home from a few hours a day to round the clock. Call today for your consultation. 561-372-9108. 561-372-9108. Online at ImmaculateHHC.com.
All right, we want to thank our sponsors for their sponsorship. Okay, but let's just get back into this discussion with the state attorney, Mrs. Rundle. You may continue, Mrs. Rundle, please.
Yeah, one of the things I think would be very perhaps demonstrative and illustrative would be maybe to talk about a case or two, because, Kathy talking about it doesn't necessarily have the same emotion that you would you be attracted to if you tell you, but this is a real life case. So
Absolutely.
let me give you an example. A 13-year-old. We had a case involving a 13-year-old, and I'm mentioning this because some of your listeners may have seen. I don't use any names, they're minors.
Right.
But you may have seen in the newspapers. So this is a 13-year-old girl. She was being inappropriately approached by an older male in her house. She left home. She then ended up going to a flea market one day.
Wow.
And at the flea market, she was approached by a man and a woman, which, by the way, it's a classic. They do that a lot. They'll get a man and a woman because you think it's safer, right? You see a man with man and a woman approach this 13-year-old little girl. What's going on with you? Oh, I ran away from home. You want to come home to us? We have a nice house. They take her into their home. And of course, they immediately rape her the minute she gets into the home.
Wow.
They immediately start putting her in clothing and teaching her how she should behave. They start selling her. She cries. She screams every night. She tries to escape. She can't. She's beaten. She's drugged, as I said. And then finally one night she's sent out into the street again. And she ends up being raped by 6 men.
Wow.
She comes home to the man and the woman who are kind of like watching her, right? And she has no money. So to punish her and torture her, they took her to a tattoo shop. And on her eyelids, they branded, he had the tattoo artist brand his brand, which was called Suave House. And right on her eyelids of this little 13-year-old girl. We were able to rescue her. It took her years and years to talk. She was so traumatized by what happened to her. The neurological damage that we do to these young little brains, these young little people, is unfathomable. Make a long story short, what did happen with that, we were able to prosecute the woman and the man. What the woman does is she recruits the young girls for the pimp. And the pimp is the man who does all the business transaction. He lines them up. He goes online. He
Wow.
tells them where to meet them. Yeah, it's a very sad situation. We were able to rescue her. We prosecuted both of them because the tattoo artist told us about it, and we were able
Wow.
to reconstruct it. We did get the law changed. You can't force a kid to have tattoos on their body with branding, so it's illegal in the state of Florida.
Whoa. Hey,
Um,
listen, I want to thank the lawmakers for making that the rule.
yes, I write
Absolutely.
it so.
Uh huh.
It's incredible what you have to think. What are the bad guys going to think of next that you have to kind of sort of think ahead of them so they don't hurt people, right?
Absolutely.
Here's another example to Corey, and this may be important for our faith-based community and our immigrant population. And I use this case because this mother had so much courage. She inspires me to do what I have to do every day, and my team. We have a task force. We have the only human trafficking center that I'm aware of in the United States of America.
Wow.
It's here, it's private. We have 25 law enforcement officers. We have lawyers embedded. We have a shelter where they can come. It's a temporary. They can get picked up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
They come to our human trafficking center. We have clothing and toiletries and a place where they can unwind and maybe de-escalate if they're on drugs. And so we can deal with them. But here's an example. Woman comes from, I believe it was Guatemala, only child. She comes and she goes to work in the farm Florida is still primarily an agricultural state. She goes to the tomato farms down south. For those of you who don't know this, it's a very large part of our bigger Miami-Dade County community. Well, she moves into a house, and it's like a rooming house. Everybody pays for a room. And she and her daughter start to work the fields. On Sundays, they go to church.
Wow.
They're very spiritual and religious. They
Wow.
meet a man in church. The man says, you know what? You brought your beautiful daughter, I believe she was 15, to this country to get an education, which was true. She wasn't getting educated in Guatemala, which is why the mother came. Takes the child into his house and he rapes her. And then he makes her go out in the field during the day to pick tomatoes. And then at night has all of the men that are working the fields come into the trailer and essentially rape her for money. She doesn't see, she does lost track. She doesn't know where her mother is. She's being held there. One day, by the grace of God, she's out in the field and she sees her mother after months.
Wow.
Somewhere in the distance, she makes a beeline to go to her mother, tells her mother the story. Now the mother has a terrible decision to make. First, she feels terrible, right? That she trusted a man who she thought was church going, that she could trust him, and she blamed herself. She had a lot of guilt, of course, but then she had to make a decision. She's probably not here legally. Do I go and tell the law enforcement authorities so that this monster doesn't do this to any other girls or boys? And maybe risk getting deported? Or do I just stay quiet? You know what she did? She chose the high road.
Wow.
She brought it to the authorities. We were able to get her a U visa. That's called like a victim's visa. You're going to be a witness.
Good job.
She
Right.
got her here, and we got him prosecuted, and he went to prison for 15 years.
Good job. Good job. That is definitely something powerful that your office was able to bring this here person who was victimizing kids to justice. So, and oftentimes, and I look at it because it's interesting that you said that, because Miami being sort of, or Florida rather, the state of Florida, more specific, Miami kind of being that the international gateway. Oftentimes, and we do have a international audience, and I want to send this clarion call for justice out to our religious leaders We have a big presence in Asia and in Australia. And interesting enough, Kathy, I was watching 60 Minutes, and they did a interview how oftentimes these perpetrators with these insidious acts oftentimes go unpunished, and a lot of times that their rings or their things that they're doing is often hidden right in plain sight. So, in fact, in an article published in the New York Post, they were talking about how it was. It's an article that was published in the New York Post by Gabrielle Furnish. Suggested that illegal massages parlors outnumber Starbucks 2-1. So, I'm thinking as I talk about this here, my mind kind of go back to the movie in New York, and I could imagine it's here also in Miami. These massages that sort of disguise themselves as massage parlors, but you can get in that movie Tugs and Hugs when the guys say, hey, happy ending. And I don't want to make light of the situation, but, that is a huge issue where we allow our law enforcement, and I don't want to say that they're allowing it, but oftentimes if if you're a faith-based organization or even a church, a lot of times you do want to look out after your members and kind of just send that caveat out there that, hey, listen, you want to listen to this podcast because we're dropping some powerful warnings out there. So your thoughts on it?
I'm so glad you brought up the massage parlors because, it's a business. So it comes in different ways, and it hides in different ways. And so the massage parlors, we did in fact do a prosecution of 6 massage parlors, and they were a chain. And the really sad thing is sometimes that population is also an immigrant population. Right. Be oftentimes by Asians. Not their faults. They're trying to make a living like everybody else. They're in America, the land of opportunity, right? And then they get taken advantage of by these bad guys, these predators. And we had, and then the sad thing is oftentimes they don't speak the language. They feel more isolated because culturally maybe they don't feel they're part of the mainstream. And so imagine how much easier it is for these bad guys to manipulate them, to exploit them, to torture them, to punish them, and really do depraved things to them.
Absolutely.
It's unspeakable what happens to a lot of these victims. And that's why I'm so grateful to folks like yourself, to Corey, that are getting this message out. It's all about awareness.
Absolutely.
12 years ago, I had all these myths in my head as to what it was. And it's been a rude awakening for me, I think for a lot of us, to understand the depth and the breadth of this modern day slavery that's happening right under our nose.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for this segment, Human Trafficking. I want to thank our state attorney for Miami-Dade County, Catherine Fernandez-Rundle. I want to remind you to like and share this YouTube channel. Also, I want you to tune in. Make sure you tune in next week for part 2. Again, this is your Agent of Change with Crack the Mic. Peace.
At Immaculate Home Healthcare, we recognize the important role home plays in healthcare, which is why we are dedicated to helping you and your loved ones heal at home. Together, we work with you, your physician, and family to help make the transition from hospital or facility care to home care a smooth one. Our team of highly skilled health professionals includes nurses, therapists, aides, and medical social workers that have been chosen for their compassion and commitment to care. They undergo rigorous background checks to ensure that only the most dependable and trustworthy staff serve you. People turn to our home health care for help with services like post-surgical care, wound care, chronic disease management, diabetes, pain management, and hypertension. Home health care costs less than hospital or facility care, and Medicare pays 100% for qualified patients. At Immaculate Home Health Care, we provide quality medical care in the comfort of home. Call us today at 561-372-9108 to discuss qualifications and payment options, or visit us online at www.immaculateHHC.com. We'll be happy to help.